Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. I'm Andrew Langer.
Hey, Andrew.
Hi. What's and who are you?
I'm Jerry Rogers.
There we
Is
go.
that
You're
working?
Jerry. You're Jerry Rogers, and this is episode 92. We'll figure out a title for this, something on the order of "It Begins Again." I don't know. We'll figure it all out. But yeah, we didn't get a chance to do a year in review. We didn't get a chance to do a New Year's episode because Jerry and I are such gosh darn busy. But we felt compelled now that we are less than 100 hours out from the inauguration itself. I'm having a hard time. Let me start here, Jerry. I am actually having a very hard time wrapping my head around the fact that as we're recording this, Joe Biden gave his farewell address last night. I was talking to someone this morning who said they had a visceral, angry reaction to Joe Biden's speech. But I'm having a hard time wrapping around that this 4 years is over. I'm sure there are folks who felt this way when Donald Trump was leaving office the first time around, though, of course, that was all dampened by the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic. But where are you in all of this? I mean, obviously, there's a certain sense of relief here to me, um, but I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that it's over.
Um, I hear you. I am constantly disappointed in the president.
The current president,
Yes.
the one who's leaving, yes.
You can't believe it's over. I keep on waiting for him to do something that's redeemable, something that is respectable. And even his farewell
Right.
address was slurred. It was it was mean-spirited.
Yeah.
It was like none other
Well, and it was
in our
it
in
was right.
history.
It was about gaslighting, right? There was no optimism. There was no sense of the future. Now, that being said, I don't remember Donald Trump's first farewell. I have no idea. I don't remember how that was. And shame on me for not knowing this. But right, I mean, as you're talking about, as you, not you, but as Joe Biden is talking about, for instance, warning us about the dangers, I guess that's part of it, right? So we're back to the threat to democracy situation, and the demagoguery moving forward. Now, of course, this is contrasted with them, many Democrats having walked back the Donald Trump is a fascist, Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. As you're leaving office, you could get and say, um, we have to work with this guy. I have great hope for America. We have, faith in the president. The president will do better this time around, whatever it is. But we got none of that in this speech. We got it from a guy who's warning us about oligarchs while he's awarding the Presidential Medal of Freedom to George Soros of all people. So yeah, it was full of gaslighting, and not full of optimism. I think you're correct there. So we had a bit of a technical glitch there. Jerry, so I was saying that it was not an optimistic speech, but it was full of the demagoguery. And I thought we had moved past the demagoguery of Donald Trump and the incoming Trump administration. Not so much here. This is a problem. I mean, it's funny. You and I have talked about the problem of the interference with the succession of power, right? We were told that there was an insurrection in 2021. You and I have surmised that the real insurrection actually happened, a soft insurrection happened between, you know, the election of 2016 and then throughout the Trump administration. We're seeing some of that again, aren't we?
I think so. And again, this is the disappointment. I keep on waiting for something redeemable. The closest we came to having that kind of redemption moment was during the Jimmy Carter funeral here in DC at the National Cathedral, where you saw former President Barack Obama sitting with and joking with, talking with incoming President Donald Trump. And I was of two minds when I saw that. Uh, First, how can you now be sitting with him, exchanging ideas and pleasantries when you've referred to him as uh, a threat for many years, when you spied on him, when, like Andrew, like you just said, you engaged in a project to delegitimize and undermine his presidency, a soft coup. Uh, that was my initial thought, was the hypocrisy, and also that a lot of what comes out of the progressive movement isn't real. It's real in the
Yeah.
sense they want power, but nothing they say is true. And we see this, right? We see progressive leaders say that, well, lying and misleading is worth it because the ends justify the means.
Right.
And but then again, my second thought was, well, maybe this is how it should be. You fight the good fight, and then the two warriors, uh, respect each other. I don't think that's true. I don't think there's any respect. I don't think there's any understanding of what happened in 2024. The Democratic Party is no longer concerned with working class Americans, and that's why they lost. Let me make one point, because
Yeah.
I don't want to filibuster,
No, no, no worries.
but I think
You're
that
just trying to filibuster before your mic cuts out again. Go
yeah,
ahead.
right. But I think this election again wasn't Republican versus Democrat. It might have been the first real nonpartisan election we've ever had. And what I mean by that is, this was Donald Trump saying to the average American, I understand you hurt. I understand that DC puts other nations, other interests ahead of you, and I'm not going to do that. And
Yeah.
that's why you saw people making under 100,000 vote for Trump. That's why you saw an increase in every single county that voted for Trump. You saw the increase.
Right.
That's why you see again, working class Americans, Americans without college degrees, more minority Americans, all going for Donald Trump. It wasn't about politics in the sense of Democrat Republican. It was, there's something else going on here. And if Trump is smart, he could really set the stage for a different kind of politics moving forward. And I don't think, and my last thing I'll say, Andrew, and I apologize,
No, no apologies.
I don't think the Democrats get that yet.
No, well,
They're,
some do. It's interesting you say that. I think you're absolutely right. I think that's why the things that John Fetterman has said recently
yes,
have been so
yes.
weirdly refreshing. I mean, the idea of keeping an open mind, not just to the nominees, but sort of generally about this, warning about the rhetoric. Because what you're saying goes along with, there are two sort of parallel things that are happening. We talked about this a while ago. I think you talked about it when you came on with me when I was talking to Drew Steele, or I was in for Drew Steele. The idea that we have been in, with the exception really of the 2012 election, that was, I think there was a whole different a mindset going on there. We have been in a change election status. Americans have been hungry for change. That also being said, I went to a thing in '06 talking about the transpartisan movement. And I don't mean that in terms of transgender. I mean in terms of, politics that transcends the traditional left right labels. And I turned around in 2009, 2010, 2011 and talked about the Tea Party movement as a transpartisan movement in the same regard, where it was not so much. Now you can say that it was a Republican movement, but it really was about people who wanted change and weren't seeing it happening, right? The reason why John McCain lost in '08 was that he really wasn't offering anything different from Barack Obama. It was just sort of light around the edges. Maybe the same thing with Mitt Romney, right? The Republicans won Congress in 2010, but lost the White House in 2012 because Mitt Romney wasn't truly able to distinguish himself from Barack Obama. Anyway, but Donald Trump
I
was.
I
Donald Trump
I
represented something very different.
I also think the 2012 election really is the the model for Democrats. And what I mean by that is this.
Excellent point.
The Democrats decided in 2012 they did not have to win over swing voters. They didn't have to worry about their traditional voters, as long as they got their base. And their
Right.
base has increasingly become more and more progressive. And remember, Barack Obama was the first president elected with a smaller portion of the vote his second time.
Right.
He literally just won in 50 plus one, and it was a base election. The Democrats have been doing that since.
Absolutely.
2020 might be the outlier, but even there, progressives ran the show and they put up a a figurehead. Joe Biden has been a figurehead. Uncle Joe, a figurehead.
Right.
The basement campaign, and then even his presidency, right? Hiding him from members of Congress. He only had a handful of cabinet meetings, and even those you had to have prearranged questions. He has been hiding out for 4 years, and the progressives have been running the show. That's why the borders are open. That's why we had massive spending. This is why we're sending billions of dollars overseas, yet people in North Carolina are living in tents because the progressives have a long game picture. And what they and again, I look, 2024 is a respite, I think, and could be a shift, but it depends what happens the first 2 years. And I'm not being curmudgeonly here.
No, 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 no.
The
Processing what you're
progressives,
saying.
right? The progressives are still winning the day. I'll give you an example. So Christopher Rufo from the Manhattan Institute has done great work on pushing out diversity, equity, and inclusion at universities and corporations and elsewhere. And he has claimed victory. And I think he's won battles. But no, DEI is still very much with us and alive and on the ascent. It is still the currency of the progressive left. And so I think we have them on their heels, but they still control the battleground, so to
Well,
speak.
let me ask you this. So that's an interesting point, and let me add to this, or sort of feed into this, and expanding on the scenario, which is how do the California wildfires figure into this? And it being emblematic. It's so funny because Bill Burr was on with one of the Jimmys the other night. I don't remember which one. It was one of the late night shows.
Yes, yes.
Um,
I didn't I heard about it. I didn't see
I've
it.
heard bits
But
and pieces of it.
and
Basically, he's saying,
people have called me about it and have said, "What the heck happened with Burr?"
well, I mean, it's like one of the things that he said was, well, all of these people on the internet, they think that they know how to manage fires. And, I don't claim to know more about the firefighters here and blah, 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 ignoring all of the other things that sort of surrounded,
Right.
that fed into how this catastrophe was
Well,
compounded.
and again, the pushback to this line of thinking, and I get it because when there's a tragedy or a catastrophic event, all the internet experts come out.
Right, of
But
course.
in this instance, Bill Burr, you know, fire hydrants didn't work, reservoirs were empty. We know that over the last 30 years, money has been wasted that was supposed to be set aside for infrastructure and for building water plants, etc. None of it was done. We
Right.
also know that there was $100 billion, right? What was the
Something like that.
number? The statewide budget for fire prevention and firefighting was slashed,
Yeah,
and the city budget was slashed. We also know from their own mouths that it was more important to have firefighters in LA that look like
absolutely.
someone
Yes.
as opposed to being able to actually fight fires and save lives.
Right.
This is not something we're making up. This is something that is in front of us. And there's a gaslighting again going on.
No pun
The,
intended.
the progressives want this to be about, oh, you don't know how to fight a fire. Keep your mouth shut. They're
Right.
doing their best. Number one. Number two. Oh, and by the way, it's climate change.
Yes.
And you know what? It's not climate change.
No.
And I've been very clear about this on my radio show and also on X. The Santa Ana winds, they've been doing this for 1,000 years.
Right.
I mean, literally for 1,000 years.
Well,
Also, in the last century, we know in 1970, 1965, and in other years, we've had massive fires in Los Angeles. Let me just say real quick for our listeners who don't understand.
no.
The Los Angeles, Southern California, is not desert.
No.
It's grasslands
Yeah.
that has been built on, and there's mountains on one side, and there's a
An ocean.
ocean on the other.
Right.
And what happens is there is a rainy season and a dry season.
Yeah.
And during the rainy season, the wet season, the government in California has done nothing to capture the rain.
Right.
That's why we have massive mudslides, etc. So we have these massive, massive mudslides during the wet season, and then all this biomass, underbrush is grows, and
No one clears it out. What
no
we
one
what
clears it
we
out.
used to call forest duff, Jerry, is the technical
Yes,
term. All the stuff that's on the bottom
right.
that you could use, like if you're building a campfire,
Yes,
you use it as tinder. Oh, and
right.
by the way, it's not as though we have not had dry periods in California over the
Every
last 50
year,
years.
every year there's a dry period.
Hold on.
It's
Let me add to this for a second, Jerry, to give a little bit of extra
Yeah.
context, because I don't think I've talked about it much on the air. So I would go to camp in California, and we'd be at a school during the week, and then on the weekends we would go hiking and camping in either the mountains around Big Sur, the Santa Lucia Mountains, or up in the mountains around Santa Cruz. And it was a huge thing when we're talking now 40 years ago. So we're talking the mid 1980s. Whether or not we would be allowed to build a campfire was contingent upon whatever the fire conditions were, whether or not it was the summer. And it was obviously fun to be camping out there. Not quite as much fun if you couldn't do a campfire to reheat your food or whatever, but that's a thing that has been going on for a very long time. Sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
Right. And again, so what's happening in California is actually natural.
Right.
It is actually something that has happened again for 100, for 200, for 1,000 years. To come in now and say all of a sudden this is because of climate change, it is anti-science to say that. It is anti-environmental to say that, because it would be better, frankly, for the environment if the government there would do proper forest management, would build infrastructure to deal with the water issues. Let me say this, Andrew.
Right.
From outer space, there are only two areas of the world where you can actually see national boundaries. Like
Yes.
you see North America, there's Mexico, and but there's
Right.
nothing. It just looks like one big
Right. Of
landmass,
course.
except for two places: North Korea, South Korea at
Right.
night.
Yep.
You can see South Korea because it's lit up,
Yep.
and Israel during the day.
Right. Yeah.
Israel is surrounded by by
Yes.
desert.
And
But
it is a sea of green.
And Israel's a sea of green.
Right.
Why? Because Israel has done what California refuses to do.
Yeah.
And again, it's better for the environment. It's better for wildlife. These massive fires, wildfires, is actually a bad thing for breathing and for asthma and for air quality and for wildlife. And again, we didn't even get
But
into
also for force. Hold on for a second. Let me add to this, because when we were at CEI years and years ago, Jerry, I can't remember the guy's name. He was at the University of Maryland, but he was a forestry expert. And one of the other problems with the lack of controlled burns for these situations is that when you get a massive conflagration, it burns so hot that it in fact sterilizes the soil. And
Yes,
that is something of course, you want to
yes,
avoid. I mean, this
yes.
is so many instances of this. Also,
And
let me add into this, the other factor is we also don't know how many of these fires have been man-made, whether it's by
right.
people who want to loot or by, illegals or whatever, which is a whole other thing that we need to peel back on.
And again, here's what I would hope for, but we don't have, and that is an honest conversation, public debate over the wildfires. But we can't, because the left doesn't care. What they care about is power. And so
Right.
therefore they cannot come to the table and admit the truth, which is it's not climate change. And yet their allies in the media, their allies in academia, their allies in corporate world will just push this false narrative of of of
But
of
this is comes
climate
back to my
change.
question, Jerry, which is because you are seeing folks I mean, one of the things, we talk about chickens coming home to roost, this happening in Southern California, which is the highest concentration of all of these leftist actors and media figures together, is you are starting to see some of them saying, something, there is a disconnect. I mean, yes, you have Bill Burr going on there and repeating this garbage narrative, but then you have the Justine Batemans of the world who are out there. Not that she's a huge actress, but
Right.
I should say I love Justine Bateman. I love what she has done over the years. We would love to have her on any of our shows. But the folks in Hollywood who are being red pilled, as it were, because of these kinds of situations, I think we're going to see more of that. That's my point in sort of connecting the dots between this and what Fetterman has said.
I think you're right, but I still would like to have an honest debate.
Of course.
I mean, you know what? Look, it is legitimate for Gavin Newsom and Democrats in the state of California to want to protect wildlife. And maybe there's a there's a trade-off where we're going to have some water issues in order to have salmon run in their natural way. I don't agree with that,
Yeah.
but we can have a debate over that.
Sure. Right.
All right. However, how do you have a debate with someone who just simply says climate change?
Right.
You can't. You
Right.
know, I realize this. I've been talking with someone of some importance the last week or so, trying to have a rational conversation, and I realized too late this morning actually that no, unfortunately, because this person is untethered from what the reality is, it doesn't make a difference what I say.
Yes.
And that frustrates me because I am a talker. I am someone who wants to be persuaded if I'm wrong, but there still seems to be in the progressive movement too many who just are not persuadable because of their hubris, because of
Right.
their hunger for power.
Well, I mean, it comes back to this. It's also about solving. There's the Rahm
Well, it
Emanuel
should be about
motive,
solving problems. Yes.
right? Which is you never let a crisis go to waste. But on the other hand, right? Let's assume for a moment that we want to deal with the Delta smelt or the fairy
Right.
shrimp, which are two
I
examples
couldn't
of endangered.
I couldn't think of the fish, so I said salmon,
No, no, no,
but
but
yes, yeah.
salmon, it's also, but no, 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 but Jerry, the point is we are dismantling hydroelectric dams in the West so that salmon can continue to move upstream when there are ways to deal with that as well. The point
Right.
is, if you're going to make these decisions that impact water supply, and you know that water supply is an issue and has been an issue, then you have to find the solutions. But you don't want to have the solutions, right? There's a massive ocean right next to these places.
Yeah,
As you said, Israel has been able to green itself by using desalination
that's
technology.
exactly right. Yep.
Why California can't crack this nut? I don't
You
know.
know, I know why. And our mentor who recently passed away, Fred Smith, would tell us this, and that is, and you know this already, and that is, you work hard and you work hard and you produce something, create something, and then your children have it easier. And
Right,
then their children don't have to work as hard, so they become academics.
right,
And then academics are jealous. Why are these people who are not learned and don't have my education background, why are they earning more than me? And so they look to government for power and
right.
for and for them, and that's what we're seeing here.
It
Uh,
is it is the flip side to what John Adams said, which was teach them politics and war so their children can study science and mathematics, etc., so that their grandchildren can have the privilege of studying art and literature and music. And but this is sort of the end result in all of this here is what you get. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, and I'll say this too, again, not to bring it home,
Yeah.
but we're on the East Coast. I'm in Washington, D.C., and the state of Maryland, its budget is this year,
Oh
and
yeah.
you have Wes Moore, who again is a possibility to run for president in 2028. He is actually giving speeches, putting out statements, talking about how he is creating wealth. The government that we're making investments, creating wealth, creating an economy for everyone. Oh, and by the way, we're going to bring down your utility bills and your energy bills, and we're going to increase your wages. Well, I just did a quick fact check. My utility bill is going up.
Right.
All of Marylanders' utility bills are going up. Why? Because we've closed power plants. Why? Because we want to go green.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the reason anyway. And so,
But
but here's my point.
yes.
And Westmore is not the only one. He just flat out lies.
Yeah, but let's talk about Westmore for a second, and let's talk about the Democrats in Annapolis. You're going to be doing a radio show on Sunday talking about this, I'm sure. They've got a $3 billion deficit, a
Yeah.
shortfall that they have to close. And rather than having the tough conversations about cutting spending and figuring out, oh my God, where did we go wrong? What are they going to do? They're going to create new tax policies.
But here's the problem I have with that.
Yeah,
I don't mind having the argument. If you want to raise taxes to fix the structural problems in the deficit, then let's have that argument. But that's not what these Democrats are doing. That's what
right.
Westmore does. Westmore actually said yesterday, look, I'm cutting your taxes.
Yeah,
He's not cutting taxes. Now there might be some who get I think someone wrote up like the average person might get $173 tax cut, but when you put that onto the ledger with the tax increases to Amazon and food delivery and groceries, in fact, he's raising net
right.
taxes.
Potter's not
But
selling, Potter's buying.
but
Yes.
but what bothers me is that they know their position is unpopular, so they just lie.
Right.
I have we ever been in a part of history where so much information is at our fingertips, and regardless of what we see with our eyes, what we actually see with our eyes, we have politicians who, regardless of the truth in front of us, they just tell us the untruth.
Right. Right. Because they know that if you're explaining, you're losing. So you just make out the outlandish statement and you leave it to your opponents to have to try to address it. But at the end of the day, so much energy is spent, having to refute what is it?
Right.
It takes what is it? It's the amount of energy necessary to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude higher than the amount of energy it takes to say
Think
that bullshit.
think about just several days ago,
Yeah.
Joe Biden said to the media that the border crossings decreased
Right.
during his tenure as president. That is demonstrably untrue.
Right.
Yet he said it. So here's a question for you. Is it because really we've been led by a cabal of progressives and maybe they just tell Joe, hey, Joe, border crossings are down. We don't know what these MAGA lunatics are talking about. And he goes out and repeats that. I mean, again,
Well, I
how
think
does he?
no, listen, I would have said for many, many years, I would have said, no, 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 he is just spouting the garbage because he wants to spout the garbage. I think in Joe Biden's case, it is increasingly more likely that he is being lied to and he is literally just out there saying the stuff, right? It's the same Joe Biden who said, I could have beaten Donald Trump. The same Joe Biden who then turned around and said that Kamala Harris could have beaten Donald Trump, though I'm not sure what that means. But that's the thing in the end, right? He was being told, I can beat Donald Trump, I can beat Donald Trump, I can beat Donald Trump. When of course he couldn't have beaten Donald Trump, right? Which is why, and Nancy Pelosi saw the writing on the wall, which is why they had their soft coup to to,
Right.
to pull him
But
out.
it shows you though, again, these progressives, they don't have any problem with lying.
Yes.
Look, I make lots of mistakes. I'm not a perfect person. I say that this is true for everybody. But I tell you one thing I don't do. I don't lie.
No.
And it seems to me that the progressives must lie in order to put forward their arguments. And again, on the radio here at the Andrew and Jerry Save the World podcast, I have said over and over again, if you have to lie, if you have to conflate and confuse, then what you're selling is bad.
Right.
Look, even in California, going back to Gavin Newsom and the Democrats, they called a special session to set aside $50 million to fight Donald Trump,
Right.
who A, isn't president yet, and B, on what issues, where are you going to
Right.
fight him? And you have these wildfires There aren't enough resources. You've cut budgets, but yet you found the time during the wildfire,
Sure. Yeah.
Andrew. As the wildfire is happening, they have a special session in Sacramento, an anti-Trump, let's put money aside to fight Trump session as people are evacuated from their
It
homes.
is quite literally, it's quite literally fiddling while the city burns. And
Yes.
but but it comes back to, right, what was being done when Donald Trump became president back in 2017. And the Attorney General of Maryland taking money that could have been used to deal with any manner of crimes, to go and push frivolous lawsuits against Donald Trump. That's the problem here, and some of it's about wanting to win and advance in politics, and some of it is about the pecuniary stuff, the you know
Yeah. Yeah.
the feathering of nests and all of that jazz. Sorry, go ahead.
I saw something today. I read it, as I'm going through, I read everything, this for real clear. I'm reading the HuffPost. And by the way, I thought the HuffPost went away. It's
No.
apparently it's still there. And it was the headline was Trump is already backtracking on his promises. And I thought, well, this could be interesting,
Mm,
because this is, politicians backtrack and politicians. So I read the areas where he's not.
yeah,
The first one was he's backtracking on Hamas. No, he's not.
right,
He's backtracking on the J6, those arrested. No, he isn't. The only thing that happened there was JD Vance said that if someone actually committed violence and committed a felony, no, they won't be pardoned.
right,
But those who were trespassing for 12 minutes and are in jail for 3 years, that's a different story. So
right.
he didn't. My point is, I went through all the areas where he's backtracking on his promises, and not one was correct. And I thought to myself, what's the point of the HuffPost? Because what they're writing is not true.
Right.
So this really is, again, it goes back to where I started today, and that is, how do you have an honest debate with those who lying is their main weapon?
Well, right. And let me add to this, because you've hit upon, this is somewhere where I wanted to go with this, which is the issue of, again, talking about soft coup and frustrating the incoming administration. Some of it is rhetoric, right? Oh, Donald Trump talking about Greenland. How is annexing Greenland going to bring down prices? But, the other thing is they are trying to do what they can to make sure that Donald Trump can't do things like bring down prices. Let me give you a couple of examples of this. Number one, right? A week ago was the announcement of this executive order on offshore drilling and essentially banning offshore drilling. 15% of our daily oil production comes out of offshore drilling. When when you cut oil production by 15%, or you make that 15% inaccessible, that has an impact on prices. Guess what, Jerry? In the last week, there were back-to-back days where I had to go and fill up at the gas pump. On day X, it was a price. On day Y, it was 20 cents higher. Within 24
Yeah.
hours, it had jumped up. They want to make sure that Donald Trump, and this offshore drilling thing is not as easy to undo as
Yeah.
simply putting out a new executive order.
Yeah. My understanding is that the Congress actually has to pass legislation to
Right.
undo it.
Now
Now,
they will probably do that. But let me
but
add to this.
but I have a
So,
question for you
yes,
though.
please.
How does that work?
Because Congress, in the law that they're relying on, gave the president the power to do this via executive order, but to do the ban, but not to rescind the ban, which I think is a flaw in the legislation. And frankly, I would challenge that as unconstitutional. Um, right? Because if you give the president the power to do something, you have to give a successive president the power to
Yeah,
undo.
what if what if the day after the ban is announced, there's a crisis that requires more oil production?
Right, absolutely, right within the same thing. I agree with you
Yeah.
wholeheartedly. But so
But
here's
Andrew, but just I'll just comment, and
yeah,
you continue.
yeah,
It's not just that. It seems to me evident that the progressives in the Biden administration have been doing this in all areas.
Oh, this is,
They
my,
have,
this is where I was going
yeah,
next with this.
go.
Was,
Yeah,
so
please.
for instance, you and I worked on this issue about a year ago about the Bayh-Dole Act, which was
Yes.
Kamala Harris wanted to seize patents in the name of bringing down prescription drug prices. That got stymied when there was a massive transpartisan hue and cry. President Obama's Patent and Trademark Office director said this is a bad idea. So what happens last week? Last week, the NIH releases a new policy that won't quite do the same thing, but is going down the road of sort of backdoor implementation of this kind of. Uh, uh, the idea is if you have a licensed patent from the federal government, you now have to submit all kinds of DEI included access plans. Otherwise, your license is going to be revoked. It's essentially the same kind of a thing. And
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 again,
so
there's a trickle down effect here that actually raises drug
let me
prices
explain.
and access. Yeah.
Innovation drives the lowering of prices. You create a new drug and other drugs, their prices come down. The any drug that has a similar property that may not be the newest thing, that will drive it down. It will help out with health costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you disincentivize innovation, if you make it harder to innovate, if you give somebody no reason to innovate, innovation doesn't happen and the prices for drugs don't come down, and you don't get greater access, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things are important. And so on two key areas where the public has wanted change and they want something done, on gas prices, which leads to the price of everything else, and then on prescription drug prices, you're creating policies that are going to make it harder for a new administration to solve the problems that they were elected to solve.
Right. And again, it calls into question the motivation. It calls into question this idea, do progressives put working Americans before party interest or political interest? And I think the answer, given their own actions, is no. Their interest is their interest, which is power.
Yes.
Again, just to dumb it down, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio, Taylor Swift will say harsh things, promote policies, and endorse candidates, say for climate change, because it's a existential threat
Right.
to humankind. But they don't sell their homes. They don't get rid of their SUV fleet. They don't stop flying private jets. They don't do anything themselves to diminish to shrink their carbon footprint. And that shows you that this has nothing to do with
Right.
climate change being a threat and has more to do with being part of the right cocktail circuit, which ultimately that cocktail circuit, those in that cocktail circuit are about we want power
Yeah.
because we're going to live our lives. Again, it's Hunger Games. I saw a thing the other day. Today it was it was what was that movie? So I Married an Axe Murderer.
So I married an expert. Love it.
Well,
Heat,
well,
trousers,
right.
no.
So
Yes.
so anyway, they're Scottish, and who's the actor again? The
It's
great
Mike Myers.
is Mike
Yes.
Myers. So Mike Myers' character is talking to the mother, and the mother's saying, "I'm reading the paper."
I'm reading the paper. The paper is filled with facts.
Yes.
Yes.
And the front and what do you remember what the headline was?
Pregnant man gives birth. That's a
Right.
fact.
Right. And
Yes.
now here we are in 2025, and this is again the progressive movement believes
I'm
that
juicing everything now, Jerry.
men can have babies. And
Yes.
so we're seeing that Hollywood by mistake, I think, is predicting the progressive future. And again, I go back to Hunger Games, where you had the capital that
Yeah.
had a certain lifestyle, and the rest of the nation in their domes of where they lived or their areas had to support the capital.
Yeah.
This is what they want.
Yes. In a world of Katniss Everdeen's, Jerry, be Billy Jack. That's all
But
I'm
you
saying.
but the thing is, like, it's in front of us.
Yes.
Like we see it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, no, no. Well, but see, okay, yes. And this is, I guess, coming back to what we've been talking about. I think for a lot of people, the bloom is off the rose. I think it is so much harder now, even with the left being in charge of the media. And it gets into something you and I talked about on the phone yesterday, which is that the numbers of folks watching major media outlets are down, as you pointed out, right?
Yeah.
It's not just MSNBC, but it's down elsewhere because
The
people,
Washington Post, I might get these numbers wrong, but I think just several years ago, they had a readership of over 20 million. It's now down under 4 million.
right, and to flip it around, right, this is why the Bezoses of the world and the folks who are owning the Baltimore Sun and other papers are trying to get out there. But it's the NPRs of the world, right, that don't have to adapt because they're government
Yes.
funded, and maybe they're gonna have to down the road. But people, you get it. You get when you read the New York Times, you're being. I mean, so many more people now get that you're being propagandized to. The Washington Post, the L.A. Times, whatever. I'll flip it around. The New York Post, etc. You know what you're getting here. The rise of independent journalism being so important, and so folks are really they're getting a greater understanding as it impacts them directly. And actually, it's funny, Jerry, because it gets into something that, you and I are talking about from the policy perspective, which is trying to rebuild the trust in science and how that has been damaged. So many of these institutions have been damaged by the left and the leftist elitists that now there's an opportunity to really rebuild.
At NIH, so Jay Bhattacharya has always been pro-vaccine.
Yeah.
Now they are attacking him, saying that he's anti-vax. He's not anti-vax. What they're doing is they're conflating. He opposed COVID-19 mandates.
Yes.
Being opposed to a mandate is not being opposed to vaccines.
100%.
In fact, mainstream scientist Paul Offit, who was at CDC and ACIP and FDA and worked on vaccine approvals, uh, has also, depending upon the vaccine, has
Right.
been against mandates. But see, they pick and choose, and they tell half truths, and sometimes they come out and just lie.
And
And
there is
again,
a and there is frankly a big difference between somebody wanting to raising concerns about a vaccine that was developed within the span of months, not years, but then pushing back on years of science for other kinds of vaccines. By the way, a vaccine that isn't really a vaccine, right? I mean, that's the other part of it. Something that is entirely new science-wise.
you know,
Right? This is like saying, okay, I've developed a new meat substitute, meat 2.0. And I've developed it in a year, and I'm going to make sure that you eat it, and if you push back against a meat 2.0 mandate, well, that means you're a vegetarian, which is not the case.
I interviewed for the Business of America podcast at the Federal Newswire uh, uh,
I should do a podcast with them. Sorry, go ahead.
a physician, a scientist who was at odds with Jay Bhattacharya. I say Bhattacharya. Is it Bhatt? It might be Bhattacharya. Well, it's Bhattacharya. There's a YA at the end of his name. I'm not quite sure
The
how that
Y is
Y.
silent, Jerry.
Well, we'll see.
No, no, I'm sorry.
Anyway, but they've argued and they've had differences. But he endorsed Jay for NIH, and so I found that interesting. I had him on the podcast to discuss, and he said, well, because Jay is interested in science
Right.
and pursuing science and not stifling ideas. And he said to me, he said, he goes, I was in favor of the COVID-19 vaccine, and he told me himself he's been boosted so many times. He said, however, not all vaccines work the same.
Right.
And he said the public health entities didn't trust the American people to understand that the measles vaccine or the polio vaccine eliminated
Right.
measles and polio. That's a certain type of vaccine that did
Absolutely.
that.
Ding ding.
However, the flu shot and the COVID shot are not the same as measles and polio. And what did Joe Biden, Dr. Fauci, and the rest of them do? They equated the COVID vaccine
100%.
with polio, and
Right.
that was a huge mistake because and they lied to us. They said you will not get the disease, and people got the disease.
And they said you cannot participate in society if you do
Right,
not get the mandate. And this idea,
right.
no, you always had a choice. That is the ultimate in gaslighting. And that's part of, Jerry, I mean, that's part of what I'm hoping is that there's going to be greater study and scrutiny and we're going to learn more. I mean, that's the thing. Some of this is about undoing the bad policy. The lion's share, hold on, is about
Yeah.
undoing the bad policy decisions of this administration. But so much of this is about reconciliation. And I don't mean that in the fiscal sense. I mean in the sense
And the
of
resetting.
understanding what was
Yeah.
going on. Lloyd Austin, we now found out was AWOL not once but twice. Off and not letting anybody know. The Secretary of Defense off doing whatever he was doing medical wise. Um, we need to know what was going on with the president. Hey, by the way, Jerry, I don't know if you've heard, but one of the largest collections of Hunter Biden artwork has mysteriously gone up in smoke. So Hunter Biden's art is now more valuable. Well, just when we thought the bottom had dropped out of that
You
market,
know,
there's
I saw a news story that said millions of dollars worth of Hunter Biden art. And I thought to myself, why is Hunter Biden's art worth millions of dollars?
well, that's the thing, Jerry. As I've said, this is what every major politician should become some kind of an artist. Right? You want to get around those pesky campaign finance laws, just
Yeah.
become an artist and start selling your artwork and have people give you, millions of dollars, right? I mean, it, by the way, just because I meant to say this before, if we want to solve California's water problem, give it to Elon Musk to solve. That's the best way to do
Well,
it.
I'm glad you mentioned
Yeah.
Musk because in the president's again, slurred farewell address, he talked about the danger of the oligarchs.
Yes.
Of course, he just gave the Presidential Medal of Freedom
George Soros.
to George Soros,
Yes.
and George Soros has done more to interfere in our political process over the last two election cycles or more. He brought us the non-prosecuting prosecutor. So again, does he hear what he's saying?
Yeah.
You know, but Elon Musk um, in Los Angeles, when folks lost access to their phones,
Right.
he immediately responded and got them access through
Starlink.
Starlink.
Right.
I mean, this is like under normal circumstances, he would be celebrated.
100%.
But
Because
because
it's,
but because he
yes.
supports Donald Trump, he's now a villain. I know someone who is a brilliant person who sold their Tesla at a loss
Yeah.
and has refuses to go on X because of a visceral hatred for Musk that has nothing to do with Musk himself,
Right.
but has more to do with Donald Trump.
Right.
That is being untethered from reality.
100. Absolutely. Agreed. Without a doubt. So, Jerry, Monday, we have an
Monday.
inauguration. You're not going to be downtown. I know this. I will be on the air
I'm
on
I'm
Monday.
I'm praying. I'm praying for you. I'm
Thank you.
worried. Not so much because I think violence will happen. I'm worried for two reasons. Number one, the city's going to be clamped down.
Yes.
So freedom of movement to get around, that sort of thing, is going to be a problem. Also, and I shared this with you privately, I'll say it here. You and I almost went to the January
Yeah.
6th rally to do a live broadcast of the podcast, of
Right.
our podcast. And we decided that it wasn't worth it and be too much with equipment and whatever else, and we didn't do it. And I've often thought about if we had gone down there and covered it as media, the FBI would have shown up at our doors.
100%. Without a doubt.
And that has, in a way, I mean, again, I'm not saying that I am somehow a prisoner in my own home, but I make decisions now where I'm going to be.
Well,
Where I do, I make,
listen,
I do, I do.
It's a pretext for you, Jerry. You just don't want to go anywhere. I mean, listen, we know
Well,
this.
I'm telling you the truth
No,
that
I
that
get it.
does
I understand.
it does weigh it does weigh on me.
And believe me, I've gone through this bit of mental gymnastics about how I'm going to handle the weekend. What are you hoping Donald Trump's going to say on Monday?
I hope he just continues with what he's been saying, and that is he's going to serve the average American,
Yeah,
the American worker, that the American worker will be put first
yeah.
above foreign interests, above political interests. I think, look, again, going back to Westmore is talking about jobs and creating jobs. He is investing in jobs. The government doesn't create jobs. The government doesn't create wealth.
Can I?
I I hope
Go
Donald
ahead.
Trump talks about small businesses, startup firms, the economy, and Main Street. That's what I hope.
Can I make a suggestion to you? You try to find a way to get, I don't know. I mean, Steve Hayward immediately comes to mind for me. Someone who is interested in presidential history, because you've got a really great opportunity on Sunday to talk about this on your show. And I know, you don't do a lot of interviews. Maybe you just do this not as an interview, you do it as a segment. Because I think the talking about the transition on Sunday going into Monday is going to be wildly important. I want Donald Trump to use this opportunity on Monday to highlight the multi-partisan atmosphere of his administration, the folks that he's brought in who are on other parts of the political spectrum, because I think there is an opportunity. We didn't talk about this on the air, and I don't want to spend a lot of time, but going to the debate between Reason and the Bulwark last month, in which Nick Gillespie said some positive things about a potential Donald Trump administration. He's tweeted out a couple of more in the last couple of days. He very much wants to see Ross Ulbricht pardoned early on.
Yeah.
I of course had Ross's mother on the Lunch Hour
Tell
podcast.
our audience real quick, remind them who he
Well,
is.
Ross Ulbricht was nominally, or at least allegedly, the founder of the Silk Road, which was a dark web platform in which all kinds of nefarious business was being done. It was actually never really demonstrated that he was the founder of it. He may have participated in it, but nobody ever tied an illegal act to Ross Ulbricht, who is now serving life in prison for his alleged role in creating this. It really is a tragedy. Go and look at my interview with Ross Ulbricht's mother, Lynn, on the Lunch Hour podcast.
My closing thought, Andrew, is
Yeah.
this. Uh, Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, said this earlier today, and that is, and he's a presidential historian.
Yeah, I would talk to him.
He's an historian. He said that in our history, no president elect has been more forceful and done more good between election day and inauguration day than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And you can see this in terms of energy, in terms of the ceasefire in Israel and Gaza. There's a number of things that, because of expectations, because he's been so clear on what he plans to do, we're seeing these things already start to
Right.
happen. And so therefore
Listen,
his inauguration speech needs to just be a continuation of what he's doing.
right. The first time in modern history since the creation of the office that a president has appointed a chief counsel for advocacy at the SBA, one of the top three regulatory positions in the executive branch, top four regulatory positions in the executive branch before the president took office. That to me is a great
I'm
sign.
I'm curious. I know we're short on time, but
Yeah.
Pam Bondi, Pete Hegseth, um, Christopher Wright Energy,
Mark
uh,
Rubio,
Mark Rubio,
Marco Rubio. Of
Marco Rubio.
course,
Sorry,
I
I
call him
did
Mark. He's a buddy of mine, so we're on
Marco Rubio.
it's my
But
nickname for him.
but I think they've all done well, and they get the votes.
I think they're going to as well. I think the only the right now the one that's up in the air is Tulsi Gabbard because they're claiming that her papers are not in order,
Yeah,
Jerry.
I tell you,
Uh,
it is. If you look at history, for our friends on the other side, Republicans do, for the most part, give Democratic presidents their their nominees.
yeah,
And it bothers me that these are all going to come down to partisan votes, except for maybe the occasional Fetterman here or there, and that's too bad
Yeah.
because there are a lot of talented individuals appointed here.
Who cross party lines.
Yeah. So I'm pleased and looking forward to the first 2 years of the administration, see what can be done. I'm concerned, though, that the Democrats haven't learned the lesson of 2024, and they're going to double down on progressivism.
I am hoping and praying that they haven't learned their lessons from 2020 and 2024, and that they will continue to double down on progressivism because I think it makes our lives easier. Jerry, what do you want folks to do?
Oh my goodness, find the truth and plant your feet and stand firm.
Check
God
Jerry
bless you,
out
man.
Sundays, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. on WBAL. I'm in for Kim Klasick on Monday from 9 a.m. to noon on WCBM. You can check him out on the Business of America podcast on the Federal News Wire. I am, of course, I do my weekly The Lunch Hour with Federal News Wire. Go and check that out. I'm Andrew Langer. He's
I,
Jerry
I,
Rogers.
I'm still Jerry Rogers.
Have a great week, everybody. Have fun, and please stay safe.